Some houses don't stay silent because they're empty, but because they're still listening. The road that led Ethan Cole into the forest wasn't marked on any map, just a narrow stretch of dirt cutting through miles of pine and shadow. The kind of place most people forgot existed, or chose to. And by the time his old pickup rolled to a stop, the late afternoon light had already begun to thin into something pale and distant, like the day itself was stepping back. Rex didn't jump out right away, which was unusual. The German shepherd normally moving with quiet confidence, but this time, he stayed still, ears forward, eyes fixed on something beyond the trees, something Ethan couldn't yet see. And when Ethan finally stepped out, boots crunching softly over gravel, he felt it too. Not a sound, not exactly, but an absence, a kind of pressure in the air that made the forest feel paused. The house revealed itself slowly between the trunks, a weathered structure leaning just slightly, as if time had rested a heavy hand on its shoulders. Windows dark, porch sagging, no wind touching it, even though the trees around it whispered and shifted. And for a long moment Ethan just stood there, taking it in, because after years of drifting, of sleeping in truck stops and roadside clearings, he had learned to trust the quiet signals most people ignored, the ones that didn't make sense but never lied. "Easy, boy," he muttered under his breath, though Rex hadn't moved, hadn't blinked, just watching. And then finally the dog stepped down from the truck, slow, deliberate, nose lifting, into the still air. And that was when it happened. Not a bark, not a growl, but something softer, something that didn't belong to a guard dog or a soldier. A low, trembling sound that built in his chest and broke into a quiet cry. The kind of sound Ethan had only heard a handful of times, and never without reason. Ethan's brow tightened as he turned toward him, because Rex didn't cry without cause. Not in the desert, not in the mountains, not even in the long empty nights when the world felt like it had run out of answers. And yet here, in front of a house that looked like it had been abandoned for decades, the dog's eyes shimmered with something deeper than fear, something closer to recognition. The porch creaked faintly as Ethan stepped closer, though his boots barely touched the wood. And that was the first thing he noticed, the way the sound didn't echo, didn't carry, as if the house swallowed it before it could exist. And he paused there, one hand resting against the doorframe, feeling the grain of the wood beneath his fingers, cold but steady. And behind him Rex let out another soft cry, softer this time, almost pleading. And when Ethan turned back, the dog wasn't looking at him anymore, but past him, straight through the doorway, into the dark interior where no light seemed to settle, where the air itself felt heavier, like it had been holding something for a very long time. Ethan exhaled slowly, the kind of breath a man takes before stepping into something he doesn't fully understand but knows he can't ignore. And as he crossed the threshold, the silence closed in around him. Not empty, not peaceful, but full, as if every step he took stirred something unseen, something patient, something that had been waiting. And somewhere behind him, Rex followed, his quiet crying fading into the kind of stillness that doesn't end, it listens. The air inside the house did not feel colder the way empty places usually do. It felt held, like stepping into a room where someone had just been speaking and stopped the moment you arrived. And Ethan noticed it immediately in the way his breath seemed quieter, softer, as if even the air had decided not to carry sound any farther than it had to. The floor beneath his boots was solid but strangely muted, each step absorbed before it could echo. And when he shifted his weight, expecting the usual creak of old wood, there was nothing, just a dull presence that pressed upward through the soles of his boots. Behind him, Rex moved in slow, careful steps, his nails barely making contact with the floor, his body low, ears tilted back. And though he had stopped crying, the tension in him had not eased. It had only changed, like he was listening to something that had not yet revealed itself. Ethan's eyes adjusted gradually to the dim interior, shapes forming out of shadow, a narrow hallway stretching ahead, walls lined with faded photographs whose details could not quite be made out, as if time had blurred them on purpose. And to his left, a small living room opened into stillness, furniture draped in thin layers of dust that looked untouched, not disturbed, just settled, as though it had been waiting rather than abandoned. He stepped toward it, brushing his fingers lightly along the back of a chair, and paused when he realized the dust did not scatter the way it should. It shifted, but only slightly, as if it remembered where it had been. "That is strange," he murmured, more to himself than to the dog, and Rex responded with a soft huff. Not quite agreement, not quite warning. A faint ticking sound reached him then, so soft he almost missed it, and he turned toward it instinctively, eyes narrowing, trying to place it, because there had been no sound before, only silence, and now this, subtle, steady, like something counting. He followed it deeper into the house, down the narrow hallway where the air grew heavier with each step, until he reached a wall where an old clock hung crooked, its glass slightly fogged, its hands frozen at exactly 4:17. Yet the ticking continued, not from the clock itself, but from somewhere behind it, somewhere within the wall. Rex stopped beside him, body rigid, head tilted, and then slowly, carefully, he lifted one paw and pressed it against the baseboard, holding it there as if marking a point. Ethan watched him, a familiar tension tightening in his chest, the same feeling he used to get when something did not line up, when instinct and reality refused to match, and he crouched down, placing his hand flat against the wall where the dog had indicated, expecting cold wood, solid resistance. But instead he felt something else, a faint vibration, barely there, repeating in a pattern too steady to ignore. He held his breath and counted without meaning to. 1, 2, 3, and there it was again, a soft pulse beneath the surface, not mechanical, not random, something that carried rhythm, something that felt almost deliberate. Rex let out a low, uneasy sound, not a cry this time, but something deeper, and when Ethan turned to look at him, the dog's eyes were fixed on the wall with a quiet intensity that made the space around them feel smaller, tighter, as if the house itself had drawn in close. Ethan ran his fingers along the edge of the baseboard, searching, and found it, a slight gap where the wood did not sit flush, a seam hidden in plain sight, and when he pressed against it, the panel gave just enough to confirm what instinct had already told him, that this house was not empty, not forgotten, but layered, holding something beneath its silence, something that had not been meant to be found easily, and yet somehow had been waiting for someone who would listen long enough to notice. The panel did not open all at once. It shifted slowly beneath Ethan's hand, resisting just enough to make him aware that it had not been moved in a very long time. And when it finally gave way, it revealed a narrow gap behind the wall, no more than a few inches wide at first, but enough to let a breath of air escape, a different kind of air, older, quieter, carrying a faint scent of wood and something else he could not quite name. Something like time sealed too tightly. Rex stepped back. Immediately, not out of fear, but with a kind of careful respect, his body lowering as his eyes stayed fixed on the opening. And then, almost as if guided by something deeper than training, he let out a soft whine that echoed faintly into the space beyond, the sound not swallowed this time, but carried, as if whatever lay behind the wall had decided to listen. Ethan widened the gap with steady hands, sliding the panel aside until a hidden passage revealed itself, a narrow stairway descending into darkness, the steps worn smooth in the center as though they had once been used often, and he paused there at the top, feeling the weight of the house press in around him, not threatening, not hostile, but aware, as if it had been waiting for this exact moment to unfold. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small flashlight, clicking it on, the beam cutting cleanly through the dark, revealing wooden steps that descended maybe 8 or 10 feet below the main floor, disappearing into a space that seemed too large to belong to the structure above. And when he took the first step down, the sound returned, faint but steady, that same rhythmic pulse he had felt through the wall, now clearer, more defined, like a heartbeat echoing through the bones of the house. Rex followed close behind, his usual confidence replaced with something quieter, more deliberate, his movements careful, almost reverent. And as they descended, the air shifted again, becoming warmer, not by much, but enough to feel intentional, like the difference between an empty room and one that still held memory. At the bottom of the stairs, the space opened into a small hidden chamber, its ceiling low, supported by thick wooden beams, and the first thing Ethan noticed was how untouched it felt, not abandoned, not decayed, but preserved, as though someone had closed the door and expected to return at any moment. A small table stood against the far wall, its surface neatly arranged with objects that had not been disturbed: a radio, old but intact, a stack of notebooks tied together with a faded ribbon, and beside them, a child's drawing pinned carefully to the wall, its colors softened by time but still visible, a house, a tree, and a figure standing beside a larger one, holding hands. Ethan stepped closer, the beam of his flashlight steady, and felt something shift inside him, something quiet but undeniable, because this was not a place built to hide something evil or dangerous. It was a place built to keep something safe, something important enough to be sealed away from the world above. Rex moved ahead of him, nose low, tracing a slow path across the floor until he reached the far corner of the room, where he stopped and lowered himself down, resting his body against the wooden boards as if marking a spot. And then he let out a soft, final sound. Not a cry, not quite a whine, but something that carried a sense of arrival, like a journey completed. Ethan watched him for a long moment, then followed, kneeling beside the spot, placing his hand flat against the floor, and there it was again, the pulse, stronger now, not coming from below this time, but from within the room itself, as if the space held a memory that refused to fade, a rhythm that had been waiting to be heard again. And as he sat there in the quiet, surrounded by objects that felt more like echoes than belongings, he began to understand that this house had never been empty. Not in the way people think of empty, because some places do not lose what they hold. They protect it, they carry it forward, waiting for the moment someone finally listens closely enough to hear what was never truly gone. The room did not feel like it belonged to the past. It felt paused, like time had stepped out for a moment and never found its way back. And Ethan remained kneeling beside Rex, his hand still resting on the floor where that faint, steady pulse seemed to live, not loud, not demanding, just present, like a quiet reminder that something here still mattered. He shifted his gaze slowly across the chamber, letting the flashlight move with intention, not rushing, because places like this did not reveal themselves to impatience. And the beam settled again on the small table, on the stack of notebooks tied carefully together, the ribbon worn but intact, as though whoever placed it there believed it would be opened again one day. Ethan stood and walked toward it, each step measured, his boots still making almost no sound. And when he reached the table, he hesitated for just a second, not out of fear, but out of respect, because this did not feel like something abandoned. It felt like something entrusted. Rex remained where he was, watching, his body calm now, no longer tense, as if whatever had unsettled him before had eased into something quieter, something resolved. Ethan untied the ribbon slowly, the fabric soft but fragile between his fingers, and opened the top notebook. The pages inside yellowed slightly with age but preserved, the handwriting careful, uneven in places, like it had been written by someone young or someone trying very hard to be understood. He read the first line silently, then again, slower this time, letting the meaning settle, and something in his expression shifted, something subtle but real, because the words were simple, but they carried weight, the kind that did not come from fear, but from being left behind. He turned another page, and another, each one revealing fragments, small thoughts, observations, moments captured in a way that felt both ordinary and deeply personal. Mentions of the house, the quiet, the way the walls seemed to listen, and always a sense of waiting, not knowing for what, but believing it would come. The beam of light drifted to the drawing pinned on the wall again, and now it felt different, no longer just a child's picture, but a piece of something larger, a story that had not been told out loud. Behind him, Rex shifted slightly, rising from the floor and stepping closer, his head brushing gently against Ethan's arm, grounding him, reminding him he was not alone in this space. And Ethan exhaled slowly, realizing he had been holding his breath without noticing. The faint pulse in the room seemed steadier now, not stronger, but clearer, as if the act of opening the notebook had aligned. Something unseen had allowed the silence to change its shape. Ethan closed the notebook carefully, not out of hesitation, but because he understood now that this was not meant to be rushed, and he looked around the room again, seeing it not as a hidden chamber, but as a place that had held on, had endured quietly, waiting for someone who would not just pass through, but would stop, would listen, would understand. Rex moved back to the corner where he had first lain down and settled there again. this time with a calm that had not been there before, his breathing slow, even, and Ethan followed him with his eyes, then back to the table, then to the walls, taking in the quiet details that had once been invisible, and somewhere in that stillness, he began to feel it, not a presence in the way people describe when they are afraid, but something softer, something like recognition, as if the house, in its own quiet way, had acknowledged him, had accepted that he had finally heard what it had been holding all along. The longer Ethan stayed in the hidden room, the more the silence began to feel different, no longer pressing in from all sides, but settling around him like something that had finally found a place to rest. And he realized that whatever this space had been holding on to was not resisting him. It was revealing itself in pieces, the way truth often does when it has been kept too long. He picked up the notebook again, slower this time, his fingers more careful, and turned to the next section, where the handwriting grew slightly steadier, more certain, as if the writer had found a rhythm in the act of putting thoughts onto paper, and the words began to shift from simple observations into something deeper, reflections on waiting, on hearing things others could not, on feeling the house respond in ways that made no sense, but somehow felt real. Ethan read quietly, his eyes moving line by line, and as he did, the faint pulse in the room seemed to align with the cadence of the writing, as though the space itself remembered these words, had absorbed them, had kept them safe all this time. Rex remained close now, no longer fixed to the corner, but circling slowly, his nose brushing against the floor, the walls, the edges of the table, tracing something invisible, something only he could follow, and every so often he would pause, ears lifting slightly, as if catching a distant echo that had not fully faded. Ethan turned another page and stopped, his breath catching just slightly as he took in what he saw. A small pressed flower taped carefully into the notebook, its color faded but still holding a hint of what it once was, and beneath it, a few lines, written with more space between them, as if each word had been chosen with care, as if they carried more weight than the others. He did not read them out loud, but he felt them, the quiet longing, the patience, the belief that someone would come, that someone would listen, and for a moment, he closed the notebook, not because he wanted to stop, but because he understood that this was not just a record, it was a voice that had never been heard. He stood and walked slowly around the room, letting his hand trail lightly along the wooden beams, feeling the texture, the slight imperfections, the marks left behind by time and presence. And it struck him then that nothing here felt abandoned, not truly, everything had been left in place with intention, preserved not by accident, but by design, as if someone had known that forgetting was the real danger, not loss. Rex moved toward the far wall again, but this time he did not lie down. Instead, he stood facing it, his posture alert but calm. And then he did something Ethan had not seen before. He gently pressed his nose against the wood and held it there, still, silent, as if acknowledging something just beyond reach. Ethan stepped closer, his curiosity now mixed with something deeper, something like responsibility, and he followed the dog's gaze, noticing for the first time a faint outline in the wall, not a door, not exactly, but a subtle variation in the grain, a shape that did not quite belong, and he reached out, running his fingers along it, feeling the difference, the slight give beneath the surface. The pulse in the room shifted again, not stronger, but more focused, as if guiding him. And Ethan hesitated only briefly before pressing against the spot, his hand steady, his breath slow, because he understood now that whatever this house had been holding, whatever it had been protecting, it was not meant to stay hidden forever. It was meant to be found by someone who would not turn away, someone who would listen long enough to hear what silence had been trying to say all along. The wood beneath Ethan's hand gave way with a quiet shift, not a sudden opening, but a slow release, as if whatever lay behind it had been waiting for the right touch, the right moment, and the panel eased inward just enough to reveal a second hidden space, smaller, narrower, tucked within the wall like a secret folded inside another secret. The air that drifted out was warmer, carrying a faint scent of paper and something softer, something almost like cedar, and Ethan leaned closer, his flashlight cutting into the darkness, revealing a shallow compartment built with careful precision, not hurried, not crude, but intentional, as though every inch of it had been shaped with purpose. Rex remained still beside him, his body calm now, no longer tense or uncertain, and when Ethan glanced down, the dog's eyes were steady, no fear, no confusion, only a quiet certainty, as if he had already known this moment would come. Inside the compartment, there were only a few objects, but each one carried a weight that filled the space more than anything larger could have. A small wooden box, its surface worn smooth at the edges, a folded piece of cloth beneath it, and a single photograph resting against the back panel, its corners curled slightly with age. Ethan reached in slowly, lifting the photograph first, his fingers careful, respectful, and when he brought it into the light, the image revealed itself in soft, faded tones, a child standing in front of the very house above them, smiling faintly, one hand raised as if mid-wave, the other holding something small that could not quite be made out, and beside the child, just at the edge of the frame, the faint outline of a taller figure, blurred, almost gone, as if time had chosen to remember one and not the other. Ethan studied it for a long moment, something tightening quietly in his chest. Because there was no fear in that picture, no sign of anything broken, only a stillness that now felt different, no longer empty, but unfinished. He set the photograph gently on the table and opened the wooden box, the lid lifting with a soft creak that seemed louder than anything else in the room. And inside, neatly arranged, were small keepsakes, a polished stone, a simple metal key, and a folded note, its edges worn from being handled more than once. The pulse in the room shifted again, aligning with his movements, not pushing, not pulling, just present, as if acknowledging each step. Ethan picked up the note and unfolded it carefully, the paper thin but intact, and though he had not yet read a single word, he could feel it, the weight of what it held, not heavy in a way that burdens, but in a way that anchors, that connects. Rex moved closer, his head lowering beside Ethan's arm, his presence steady and quiet. And for the first time since entering the house, there was no tension left in him, only calm, as if whatever had called him here had finally been found. Ethan's eyes moved across the page slowly, taking in each line, each carefully written word, and as he read, the room seemed to settle even deeper, the pulse softening, the silence shifting from something that held on to something that was ready to let go. The words on the page were not long, not complicated, but they carried a stillness that felt deeper than anything Ethan had read in years, the kind of stillness that comes from someone who has stopped asking to be heard and simply hopes to be found. And as his eyes moved across each line, the meaning settled slowly, gently, like something that had been waiting for the right moment to be understood. The note spoke in a quiet voice, one that did not accuse or demand, but remembered. It spoke of days spent listening to the house, of nights where silence felt like company, of believing that someone, someday, would follow the same quiet signals and arrive not by accident, but because they were meant to. Ethan lowered the paper slightly, his breath steady but heavier now, not from fear, but from recognition, because there was something in those words that echoed a part of him he had not named in a long time, the part that understood what it meant to keep going without knowing if anyone would ever notice. Beside him, Rex rested his head gently against Ethan's arm, the warmth grounding, present, and when Ethan looked down, the dog's eyes were calm, almost knowing, as if he had not just led the way here, but understood why they had come. The faint pulse that had filled the room began to soften, not fading completely, but changing, slowing into something less like a signal and more like a release, as though the space itself had been holding its breath and was now finally letting it go. Ethan folded the note carefully, placing it back inside the wooden box for a moment, his gaze drifting to the photograph again, to the small figure standing in front of the house, and he wondered how long this story had waited, how many seasons had passed above while everything below remained unchanged, untouched, held in quiet preservation. He reached for the metal key next, turning it slowly between his fingers, feeling its weight, its simplicity, and something about it felt less like an object and more like a continuation, a piece of something that had not ended, just paused. Rex shifted slightly and moved toward the base of the stairs, then stopped halfway, turning back to look at Ethan, not urging him to leave, but inviting him to follow. And Ethan understood then that this was not just about discovery, It was about what came after, about carrying something forward that had been left behind too long. He closed the wooden box and held it for a moment before setting it back exactly where it had been, not out of hesitation, but because he understood that some things are not meant to be taken, only honored. And as he stood, the room felt different again, lighter, not empty, but at peace in a way it had not been before. The silence no longer pressed or listened. It rested, like a story that had finally been told, even if only to one person and one loyal dog. Ethan turned toward the stairs, the faint beam of his flashlight guiding the way back up. And as he placed his foot on the first step, he paused briefly, glancing back one last time, not out of doubt, but out of respect, because he knew that what he had found here was not just a hidden space beneath a forgotten house. It was something quieter, something deeper, a reminder that even the most silent places can carry voices that never truly disappear. They simply wait for someone willing to hear them. The climb back up the narrow stairs felt different from the way down, not because the steps had changed, but because Ethan had, and each movement carried a quiet awareness that something had been set right, not fixed in the way people often expect, but acknowledged in a way that mattered more. The beam of his flashlight traced the walls as he ascended, catching the grain of the wood, the small imperfections that now felt familiar, almost intentional, and when he reached the top, the house greeted him with a silence that no longer pressed against his chest. It simply existed, calm, steady, like a place that had finished holding its story. Rex stepped past him into the hallway. His gait relaxed now, no hesitation in his movements. His ears no longer tilted back, but forward again, alert in the way he always was when the world made sense, and he paused near the wall where the hidden panel had been, glancing at it once before continuing toward the front of the house, as if to say there was nothing more to fear there. Ethan followed slowly, his hand brushing the surface of the wall where the pulse had once been strongest, and though it was still there, faint and steady, it no longer called out. It no longer needed to. It simply remained, like a memory that had found peace in being remembered. He stepped into the living room again, the furniture unchanged, the air still carrying that quiet stillness. But now there was something softer woven into it, something lighter, as though the house itself had released a weight it had carried for far too long. Outside, the late afternoon had begun to fade into early evening, a pale golden light slipping through the windows, touching the floor in long, gentle lines, and Ethan stood there for a moment, letting it settle over him, realizing how long it had been since he had felt something like this, not relief. Exactly, but a kind of still clarity that did not demand anything from him. Rex moved toward the front door and stopped, turning back once more, his gaze steady, patient, waiting, and Ethan understood that this was the part most people miss. Not the discovery, not the hidden places or the secrets uncovered, but the choice of what to carry forward and what to leave where it belongs. He walked to the doorway and rested his hand on the frame, the same spot he had touched when he first entered, and the wood felt different now, warmer somehow, not in temperature, but in presence, as if the house no longer needed to hold him there. He stepped outside, the air of the forest meeting him with a quiet breeze that moved freely now, no longer held back, the trees whispering again in a way they had not before, and Rex followed, standing beside him, his body aligned with Ethan's as it always had been, steady and sure, behind them. The house remained still, but not silent in the way it had been before. Its quiet now carried something complete, something that no longer waited to be heard because it had already been understood, and as Ethan walked back toward his truck, the fading light stretching across the path ahead, he felt the subtle shift within himself, not dramatic, not overwhelming, just enough to know that something had changed in a way that would stay with him long after this place disappeared behind the trees. Because some stories do not end when they are found, they begin again in the person who chooses to remember them. The road away from the house curved gently through the trees, fading into the kind of quiet that did not need to be broken, and Ethan drove slowly, not because he had to, but because something in him was no longer in a hurry to leave, as if part of him understood that what he had just walked through was not meant to be rushed past or forgotten. Rex sat beside him in the passenger seat, his posture relaxed now, his eyes half closed but still aware, the way they always were after something important had passed. and every so often he would lift his head slightly, as if listening, not to the forest outside, but to something that lingered just beneath the surface of memory. The last glimpse of the house disappeared behind the line of trees, but it did not feel like leaving, not in the way it had when Ethan first arrived. It felt more like a door closing gently, not to shut something away, but to keep it safe where it belonged. The sky above shifted into deeper shades of evening, soft blue fading toward gray, and the first faint stars began to appear, steady and distant, the kind of light that does not demand attention but remains for those who choose to look. Ethan rested one hand lightly on the steering wheel, the other against the worn fabric of the seat, and for a long moment, he simply drove without thinking, letting the road carry him forward while his mind stayed behind, not trapped there, but connected in a way he could not quite explain. He thought about the notebook, the drawing, the photograph, the small wooden box left exactly where it had always been, and he understood now that not everything valuable is meant to be taken. Some things are meant to be witnessed, to be honored, to be remembered exactly as they are. Rex shifted beside him and let out a quiet breath, the sound soft and steady, and Ethan glanced over. A faint, almost unnoticed smile touching the edge of his expression, because he knew that without the dog, none of this would have happened, not the discovery, not the understanding, not the quiet shift that now settled into his chest like something finally at rest. The miles passed beneath the tires, measured in silence and steady motion, and somewhere along that road, Ethan realized that he felt different, not changed in a way that could be explained in words, but adjusted, as if something inside him had found alignment with something outside, something older, something patient. The world around him remained the same trees, the same road, the same fading light, but the way he moved through it had softened, the weight he carried no longer pressing as heavily as it had before, and though he could not name exactly what had been left behind in that house, he knew it was something he no longer needed to carry. Ahead, the road opened into a wider stretch, leading toward distant lights that marked the edge of a small town, and Ethan guided the truck forward, steady, quiet, present in a way he had not been in a long time. Beside him, Rex settled deeper into the seat, calm, certain, as if the journey they had taken had reached its natural end. And as the night slowly gathered around them, Ethan kept driving, not searching anymore, not chasing anything unseen, but simply moving forward with the quiet understanding that some miracles do not arrive with noise or certainty. They arrive in silence, in forgotten places, in moments when someone chooses to listen, and sometimes that is enough to change everything without ever needing to say a word.